Well, thank you so much. Great to be here today with my former colleague and also journalist and author, James. So this is a bit of a different topic, I think, than what we're used to hearing from this particular stage. You know, your background is in investigative journalism. You're a national security reporter by background. So I'm curious kind of what made you decide that you wanted to delve deep on QAnon for this book?
I think it was, I mean, actually, honestly, part of the draw of it was just how stupid QAnon is. Like, it's really dumb. It started on 4chan. Like, you know, has any serious national security leak ever, you know, would it ever start there? It was basically live action role playing. It was people pretending to be this sort of thing. And yet, it was obvious fairly early on it was really radicalizing people. You know, we'd seen the motive force of something like Pizzagate. And I thought, you know, we know about conventional radicalization. We know about how people become extremes, or we think we do. So having a new lens to look at that when there's not this old history to it, when there's not a sort of serious thing at the core of it, I thought it gave you quite a different lens on some quite old problems.
Right. And you call it, you know, a one-size-fits-all conspiracy. It's, you know, this kind of, there's endless adaptations. It started as one thing, it kept morphing, you know, it became one of the radicalizing forces on January 6th, on the attack on the US Capitol. It kind of continued morphing after that into, you know, a really important part of the anti-vaccine movement. Can you, you know, talk a little bit about that, about, you know, kind of where it started, kind of how it, you know, it seems, I remember covering it myself, many people thought that after President Biden's inauguration, it would be done, because one of their core tenets at the time seemed to be that Trump would rise up and, you know, people, you know, like take all these people down and, you know, become ruler of the world, basically.
Yeah.
And it seems like, you know, it's still alive and well. So can you talk a little bit about how people seem to keep
I mean, it started as this immensely specific sort of prediction, and it was that Hillary Clinton would be arrested within a couple of weeks, and that the National Guard had already been mobilized, and that, you know, there are all sorts of quite specific details that were very, very short time limited. And it always surprises me that each time a new date comes and goes, people think that will change anything, because you know, we had at one point JFK was going to come back, or that Trump was JFK, or various other variants of it. But I think it's a specifically internet age phenomenon to have this kind of leaderless movement. You know, any control that Q, and who Q is has changed over time, but any control that Q had over QAnon ended before most people had ever heard of it.
Right.
And so instead it kind of became this mindset of there is a conspiracy of the elite against the masses, which is a very old trope, and then anything that fit into that could be absorbed by it. So it's never really taken on aliens or the earth is flat, but satanic child abuse, I mean, there's always time, satanic child abuse, 15-minute cities, you know, adrenochrome, the old Hunter S. Thompson harvesting a chemical from humans, and lockdown really galvanized everything.
Yeah.
And it was, firstly, everyone had a lot of free time on their hands. Well, people who weren't sort of having to still go to work had a lot of time on their hands and a lot of time on the internet. But also, it was an unprecedented extension of state power in most of our lifetimes. And so people start looking for explanations for that if it feels wrong. And so that helped it pull in 5G, population control, the Great Replacement. Someone I spoke to for the book, an academic, called it the conspiracy theory that ate all the other conspiracy theories. And I think that's a really good sort of thing. It mutates constantly. It's a changing target.
Right. Yeah, and I remember, I mean, covering it, you know, again, on inauguration day, it seemed like, you know, a lot of experts, a lot of people were happy for it to be gone. I remember there was also kind of a lot of schadenfreude. People would be, you know, looking at these posts from, you know, conspiracy theorists kind of pointing and laughing at the fact that they were waiting and waiting for someone to come, you know, and take down Biden, and it just never happened. And we kind of like to mock it because it is very outlandish. There's parts of it that are very that are easy to mock, and so are people who are very gullible and susceptible to these things. But it is actually quite serious in many senses. It has led to actual deaths. It has torn apart families. And it actually burst onto the scene the first time, with Pizzagate, with the fact that someone showed up with a gun at a DC pizza parlor saying they wanted to rescue children that they thought were trapped. So can you talk a little bit about, again, in the process of reporting the book, it's a little difficult sometimes not to caricature people who tend to believe this, but obviously it is incredibly serious.
Yeah, I mean, look, it contributed towards a violent coup attempt in Germany, to the January the 6th riots. The core of the January the 6th movement was QAnon, to violent protests in Canada. It has, I think, often when combined with mental illness and other factors, it has contributed to some quite horrendous murders, and some of children.
Yeah.
I think in some cases to protect them,
right.
rather than, so there is a very sort of dark side to it. And I think part of it is easy to want to laugh at bits of this because it's silly.
Right.
It's
very
it's
outlandish.
daft. You see the videos, but the way it radicalizes people is quite interesting. Like, no one should think that they're too clever to fall for a conspiracy theory or to get pulled into a real conspiracy movement. Mm-hmm. There are genuinely Nobel Prize winners who are fully off the reservation on these issues. Right. And generally, it's an intelligent, curious person who's going to get pulled in.
Right.
And QAnon is really clever in that it sort of trains you to radicalize yourself.
Right.
Because someone will be saying, well, how come this hasn't happened? And what about this? And if you don't believe me, Google this phrase.
Yep.
Do your own research is the QAnon
right.
mantra.
And as we've actually discussed, the idea that powerful people are in charge of certain things in the world and don't want you to know about certain things is, it's true. And so yeah. I think it's really easy for people to start at a reasonable point and be sucked in.
And this is exactly how it works. All the best conspiracies, there is a kernel at the start of it that gets you there. Is it ridiculous to worry about elite people and child abuse when Jeffrey Epstein was there? And then when he died in quite mysterious circumstances? I don't think people are stupid if they go, well, he was photographed with all of these people, what's going on there? But you can start from that quite reasonable question and end up in, there are 2 million children in tunnels under Washington, D.C., and Obama's running it all. Those are the extremes. But if you start from one, given that, naturally we tend to make connections where we shouldn't, we sort of put 2 and 2 together and make 10. That's human. Our brains are pattern matching machines. Mm-hmm. And so we often overfit. Right. And also the tendency is confirmation bias. Right. You're an investigative reporter, same as me. People think we're going, well, how can we join these dots? Right. And it's usually
the
more
string on the wall.
Whereas in practice, it's usually kicking the hell out of your own story, going, how might I be wrong? Yeah. How can I definitely show this and this are connected and this happened?
Yeah.
Whereas, I think people think it's the string.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think another part doesn't get as much attention, and we're seeing it now in obviously a lot of different things, is that people get something out of it beyond beyond just naively falling down the rabbit hole and going crazy, right? And for many people, they actually found a real sense of community. Obviously, the isolation of the pandemic, people are sitting around alone. The government's telling you can't go outside. You have to get this shot to be able to, go to work. It obviously, a lot of people had resistance to that, and they found community through people who also had these suspicions. And then when certain conspiracy movements petered out, again, like QAnon kind of continued, for example, in the anti-vaccine movement. And we saw a lot of the people that had been, at the January 6th rally show up again a year later. I would go to these rallies, talk to the same people at an anti-vaccine rally. So can you speak a little bit about the importance of psychologically, since you did this research for the book, on the kind of sense of community that people found and the fact that they weren't willing to give that up?
Yeah, so I think a crucial thing is, as odd as it sounds, it's quite empowering to believe in QAnon. Mm-hmm. Your life doesn't suck, or, you haven't achieved what you wanted to because maybe you're average, or just maybe capitalist systems stacked against you, but in big, complicated, abstract ways. There are people acting against you, and you know about it, right, and you're onto it, and you've got some secret champions in high spaces as well, you kind of become a hero of your own narrative,
right.
which is a good start. But as you say, it's not just that you've got friends and companionship, you've got allies. You know, they believe in the cause the same as you do. So you're in a movement, or it feels like a movement.
Right.
But of course, at the same time, it's tearing you away from your existing communities, often from your family, from your sort of situations, which means you have to invest more in the new movement, in QAnon, because you've got fewer other outlets in your life, fewer other people. Right. And so you end up in this cycle where you get more and more caught in. And there were two quite strange ones I encountered in the book, and one of them was one of the guys who helped me with the research sort of told me a bit sheepishly partway through that his mom was really into QAnon, and they lived together, and it was lockdown, and it was making them become estranged. And she had started kind of just looking at it on Twitter for an hour or two a day, and then after January the 6th, Twitter and Facebook, having tolerated all of this for about 2 or 3 years and let it grow and grow, banned QAnon content overnight. Right. He said that drove her onto Telegram, and then she was doing 11 hours a day. Yeah. And bizarrely reconnected with her estranged sister over a shared belief in QAnon.
Oh, God.
So bringing people together, tearing people apart, because they're basically not on speaking terms still now, 2-3 years later.
Yeah.
But then you had a fascinating case of someone in Australia, a guy married to an aide of the then Prime Minister Scott Morrison, was a fanatical QAnon believer and had got his teenage son into it as well. And they had, it seems, managed to get Scott Morrison, when he was doing an apology for historic child abuse in care homes, to insert the word ritual, which is a real call out to people who are in this. And it was taken as such by the QAnon movement. They went, look, here's someone admitting it. Right. You know, he's telling us this. He used in this public address the phrase ritual child abuse. But he was starting to get more and more erratic, and his sister panicked to the point of, you know, someone who is this erratic with this much access to the PM. She ended up calling the intelligence agencies on her own brother. And so you've got some extraordinary conflicts and situations that come from that sense of mission.
Right. And, you know, I've spoken with a lot of people, you know, it really did tear families apart because you're at certain points not speaking the same language whatsoever. But in many cases, it's not blatant or extreme enough for there to be anything you can do besides try to de-radicalize them yourself. But one of the things we also talked about is that for many people, you know, it ended up putting people who believed in this in the same environment that never would have been in the same place before. So, you know, in the United States, you would have, you know, a soccer mom, like someone who, you know, usually was on yoga websites and Instagram accounts, who slowly kind of got sucked into some of these conspiracies because she thought that it was in order to save children. She was, you know, she was supporting those kind of things. And then there would be, you know, a very hardened neo-Nazi white nationalist guy. And these people ended up being in the same, rubbing shoulders at the same rallies and at the same places. So can you talk a little bit about that?
And believing the same causes, yeah. I think one really underappreciated thing is, I think at this stage it's probably pretty clear that women and, you know, somewhat older women with kids, often teenage kids, are the core of QAnon. They are the majority members of QAnon. And it's often through things like yoga and things like wellness and this sort of thing. And there's a sort of underappreciated phenomenon. It's a real everything is connected sort of thing. You know, it's why I sort of call it a pandemic. You've got to think of ecosystems. Yeah. But women are generally quite badly let down by conventional health treatments. A lot of chronic pain conditions and chronic fatigue conditions overwhelmingly affect women. You've got things like endometriosis, which are badly diagnosed and badly treated. And so women often end up feeling very alienated by conventional medicine and going into wellness. And, you know, most of that's harmless. You know, acupuncture, aromatherapy, chiropractic, yoga, all of that. People find a benefit in it, no problem. Yeah. But people often sort of find their personal trainer or their yoga instructor will start saying, well, you're taking that conventional medicine, that's poison, don't do that. And the wellness, it's referred to as the wellness to woo pipeline or the wellness to fascism pipeline, you start seeing people go, well, yeah, but have you seen this about vaccines?
QAnon, right?
Or have you seen things, pastel QAnon? And people then get pulled into worrying about 5G or vaccines. You then get a lockdown. People see the population control. And so you go from a very legitimate lack of trust that builds into something more. And then if you've got, to use the US image of a soccer mom, if she starts believing QAnon, she will probably convince her husband of it. And if they've got teenage kids, they may well start getting pulled into it too. And so you don't tend to see, generally, there's been a few exceptions, but you don't tend to see women acting in violent impulses after being pulled in. But they are the recruiters for the men who then often do it. And I mean, there's something, it makes it sound a weird sort of mirror world wholesome. Yeah. How many things will teenage boys and their mothers have shared interests?
It's a bonding experience.
A bonding experience in this weird fascistic cult.
Yeah. Another part that's really interesting is we think of it as, at first it was thought of as this uniquely American phenomenon because it focused so heavily on the role of Donald Trump as some kind of redeemer, savior figure, good against evil. But ultimately, it went global really quick, and it was always global in some ways. I'm from Latin America, and I have a lot of, way too many WhatsApp groups, massive ones that are constantly sending me things. And even a couple of months ago, I remember being forwarded something that sounded exactly like QAnon to me that was coming from a pretty isolated community of Bolivian nuns living somewhere in Bolivia who were, very invested in this global war. And so it's this thing where really, it spread worldwide quite quickly, and it is still embedded in that. So can you talk a little bit about where you've seen or what examples you've seen abroad where it seems to really kind of have embedded itself?
It's I have to say I really want to visit this Bolivian nunnery now. I'm just completely fascinated by this. But yeah, it spread, and I mean, basically they did that by sort of ditching the Trump bits, which is odd in a way, as he's so central to the beginning of it. But I think most people who are in what we tend to refer to as the broad sort of QAnon movement have probably never heard of Q anymore. It's a name, it's a catch-all, but very few people go onto 4chan or 8chan. They are niche pursuits.
Thank God.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to go there. They're niche, they're largely young men. It's a sort of edgelord environment. It's not where most people want to spend their time. So most people have got it from an influencer or from something else. But then it's rebranded in all sorts of different ways. So during some of the lockdowns, there was this global hashtag Save the Children movement, which was essentially QAnon without the QAnon branding. And some people, I think, just thought they were doing a general, against child trafficking thing.
Right.
But if you looked at any of the stuff and read any of the videos, it was this mass child kidnap, rape and murder situation. Right. And so you had all of those which sort of pulled people in. You had the anti-vax stuff pull people in. And so, Germany's lead QAnon influencer, who's now actually on the run and in hiding, he's in exile, was a vegan chef.
That checks out, actually.
You had Canada's trucker protests ended up with a big QAnon-style influence. You had a big Australian scandal with it, as I mentioned. It's in France, it's in Germany. There's in England, there's a sort of country castle hotel in Devon that's got a massive QAnon flag flying over it. And instead of Bibles in each bedroom, there's like a QAnon introduction primer.
Oh, wow.
It is everywhere. It hasn't sort of become every conspiracy theory. There's sort of an interesting war between David Icke, who says the global elite are all secretly lizard people. He is very anti-QAnon. He says it's a false flag to take people away from the truth, which is that the global elite are lizard people, obviously.
Right. And it's so crazy because obviously, the person posting as Q stopped for a very long time, kind of came back, but it doesn't matter what, that's done with. It doesn't rely anymore on, sifting through a lot of those messages. I'm curious what you think about, it still seems to me like some politicians, some powerful people are still kind of winking at it every once in a while, using codes that, kind of code words very cynically because they know that people will pick up on that and support them and, think that they're in on this. Obviously at this point, it's, we're many, many years out from this, from what some people would consider the peak of technical QAnon, but it's still really having a big influence, and a lot of powerful people are still kind of using it to drive conspiracy support for other things. Is that?
I mean, it's very firmly embedded in the U.S. Republican base. I mean, you have to accept that. Trump doesn't so much sort of wink at it as sort of wig and then mug to camera for a while. He has used the QAnon sort of theme song, so to speak, as his like pre-stage music on many occasions now. And so he can't be more overtly signaling, hey, yes, I'm with you. I mean, Mike Flynn, who had the highest possible security clearance you can have in America, was the national security advisor, now hosts an explicitly, avowedly QAnon podcast. You've got, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Babbitt, who on one day will say, yes, I do believe it, on another, no, but there's a lot of truth to it. They're very good at dancing around the edges of it. But you're seeing even relatively mainstream governments wink at things that are quite adjacent to this stuff. In a fairly shameless bit of flirting with conspiracy that made no sense at all and I don't think worked for them. The Conservative Party, who are in government in the UK, at their annual party conference, made a big thing of banning 15-minute cities that would stop you leaving the area where you live, which no one's proposed. And also they're the government. They would be the sinister power behind it. And so, I think the willingness of people to engage, to flirt with something this dangerous, makes tackling it a lot more difficult. It's and you do see more and more movements that will do it. Conspiracy and populism need each other. Populism doesn't work without some kind of sinister elite or sinister cabal. And so while QAnon remains the biggest show in town for this stuff, while it's got those untapped forces, it will be used by populists.
Right, because it is so incredibly amorphous, right? Again, we saw several peaks where those people were kind of reconvening in a real life way, anti-vaccine movements, certain rallies. If you go to a Trump rally today, as he's running for president again, you still see a lot of QAnon flags and slogans. But I'm interested in your thoughts on where it is now. What are you seeing as the biggest ways that it is reconstituting itself and attracting more supporters now? What is the current cause that you see them rallying around now or in the near future?
I think you're seeing it at the moment almost a little bit nascent. It's a little bit retreated back from some of the peaks it had during COVID. They really liked railing against vaccine passports. That was a very popular
It was a very concrete cause,
Yeah. I mean, I should stress it is not silly or conspiratorial to oppose vaccine passports. I, in fact, wrote myself opposing vaccine passports, but not because I thought they were some sinister plot to bring in the mark of the beast.
Right.
It is the nature of the dose makes the medicine. But, you had vaccine passports, or you had lockdowns, or you had these quite concrete measures to go against. And now, actually, the state has rolled back to the size it was before. There's not really been the permanent power grab. And so people are casting around for what they can portray as the power grab. And you never quite know what it's going to be. 15-minute cities is mobilizing some of them as a core of it. But there'll be something.
Right.
There will be some new restriction that needs to come in, or some new finance treaty. You often find if there's an international treaty being discussed, that can become the focus of it. It's going to change. This is going to be what introduces the one world government or something. People tried a few quite strange theories over Ukraine. There's some of it towards Israel, Gaza, but I think none of those are quite catching. And so it still exists as this ground force and this swell, but it's almost like it's trying 100 things until it sees which one works.
Right.
And it's always been very good at that. It does mutate like a virus. And if an adaptation doesn't make it spread better, if it doesn't make it sort of pull people in more, it moves on from it.
Right. And it's interesting because we keep talking, for those of us who track this, I mean, we keep talking about them or like, this is the thing that they are like, rallying around. But ultimately, post-Q, it is kind of like a leaderless movement. Do you think someone, I mean, out of curiosity, do you think someone could come and kind of, because that could be quite dangerous. A lot of people have been kind of looking at that. Like, could there be, like, we have seen kind of QAnon influencers, as you talked about. Like, but, do you think there's the possibility of someone really taking leadership and actually mobilizing people in a pretty dangerous way?
I mean, the funny thing is, we're pretty sure we know who the original Q is now.
Right.
And it was this South African guy who sort of was an early QAnon influencer. He was like, I have no idea who he is, but he's great, whoever he is. I have to say, the early Q posts, by the way, they're brilliant. They like use the Socratic method. They're really compelling because it just asks
like a puzzle,
you lots of questions in a row. And again, it's part of why it feels empowering.
Nonsense questions, but it works.
It's, but they're quite interesting when you read them. Like, I like them.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't because of what they've done, but fairly early on, he had the account stolen, again, we're fairly sure, by the people who operate 8chan. Ron and Jim Watkins. There's a good podcast on this called Finding Q by Nikki Wolf, by the way, if you want all of that hunt. Yeah. Whereas I get rid of Q in about chapter 3. It's not... But if Q can't lead QAnon, who could? And you do see some of these influencers get big in the movement. If they start getting too big and try and become spokespeople for it, it's got a very tall, poppy-ish kind of culture. They don't like anyone trying to come in as a leader or a big fish there, do they? And so I don't know whether it's good that it would be difficult for someone to come in and be a figurehead or a leader of it. Maybe RFK is the nearest that they have to that.
It's coming back.
He's quite a dangerous figure and is quite widely supported in QAnon. Like, they really like him. Yeah. So him or Trump can sort of steer it or guide it. But anyone else, I think its leaderlessness and its rudderlessness is part of what makes it so malleable, and that's what makes it so dangerous.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see kind of where it goes next, but thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and thank you so much.
So thank you, everyone.